Walter Koenig. This is episode 32.
You're listening to 70s Trek with Bob Turner and Kelly Casto, the fan podcast that looks at Star Trek in the 1970s. It was the decade that built a franchise.
It certainly was, and this week we talk about one of the cast members who was on that ride during the 70s, Walter Koenig. I'm Bob Turner.
And I'm Kelly Casto. Walter Koenig played Ensign Pavel Chekov on Star Trek, and he had the distinction of not only being the last regular cast member hired, but was also the only one not included in the animated series.
That's what was missing from that show.
Yeah.
Well, we'll talk about Walter in a moment, but first, let's tell our listeners how they can find us.
Sure. Just head over to our Facebook page at facebook.com/70strek. There you can listen to past episodes and leave us a comment or a question. We love hearing from our listeners.
Oh, we sure do. And you can also send us an email to 70strek@gmail.com. And you can find the show on iTunes. Just search 70s Trek in the podcast section. We just want to ask you to leave a rating and a review because that will help more people find the show. Kelly, Star Trek ended its first season in what a lot of people think was pretty good shape. You know, there were very few clunkers, and the crew, the production crew, had produced, I think, some really great shows in that first season.
Yeah, they did, but Gene Roddenberry knew something was missing. He felt a younger crew member might lighten the mood a little, and that's where Walter Koenig comes in.
You know, it's amazing how you add one character or one cast member, as it were, to the chemistry, and look how it changed. Look at how much lighter and more energetic the shows in the second season are. And it's really because of Chekhov's presence.
Right.
Right. So, I mean, Koenig really did a great job of inhabiting that character of Chekhov, you know, of lightening the mood, of having some fun. And really, if anything was missing in the first season, that's what it was, a little bit more sense of lightheartedness and fun. So let's talk about who Walter Koenig is, first of all, before we dive into what he was doing in the 70s. Walter was born September 14th, 1936 in Chicago, and his family later moved to New York. His parents were Russian Jews. They were from Lithuania. Lithuania at the time was part of the Soviet Union. Their family name was Königsberg, but his father shortened it, and I'm positive that I butchered that pronunciation. However, we're going to go with that.
Okay.
But as they immigrated to the United States, his father shortened it to Koenig, and when they came into the country. In his autobiography, Warped Factors, A Neurotic's Guide to the Universe, I love that title, Koenig explained that he was a quiet, insecure child, and he sometimes felt like he didn't fit in. You know, he described himself as a person who, when something good would happen, he would be waiting for the other shoe to drop. He'd be waiting for the next bad thing to happen. And he's, you know, through his book, he talks about that tendency. Even after Star Trek, you know, he was waiting for, all right, what's going to happen next now that something good happened? So he always sort of had that neurotic view of life. And his book, if you haven't read it, that view and how some of the stories he tells, it's very entertaining, very funny. Walter attended Grinnell College in Iowa, and believe it or not, he was a pre-med major. But he decided to study psychology and ended up transferring out to UCLA. And it was that time in Los Angeles as an undergrad that he got the acting bug, probably being out there around it so much, and it brought something out in him.
Probably, yeah.
Probably. So after graduating with his bachelor's, he moved to New York and he attended the Neighborhood Playhouse. That's That was a big acting school in the 50s and early 60s where young actors got a lot of experience. And ironically, he was at the Neighborhood Playhouse, get some of these names, with Dabney Coleman, Christopher Lloyd, and James Caan. He was there the same time they were. Pretty cool stuff.
Yeah.
He began his acting career in New York, and he did a lot of stage work. And his first TV role was in a show called Combat with Vic Morrow, who was the star. Do you remember that show as a kid?
Oh, yeah.
I loved Combat. I thought it was great.
Well, I saw it on reruns, but...
Well, sure, absolutely. Yeah, I know, and I'm 78, but I remember it. I'm not 78, and I remember it in reruns. He also, according to IMDb.com, had the starring role in a movie called The Norman Vincent Peale Story. If you don't know who that is, Norman Vincent Peale was an American minister and author. Probably his most well-known work was The Power of Positive Thinking. And he wrote that back in the 30s. But it was a very influential work later on in the 50s and 60s. And there's not a lot of information about the movie. It's the name of the movie is there, and it shows Walter starring in it, and that's it. So that's what we got on that one. But, he was a pretty busy actor between 62 and 67. He starred in some shows like The Untouchables, General Hospital, Strange Lovers, The Great Adventure, The Alfred Hitchcock Hour, Ben Casey, Mr. Novak, Gidget, I Spy, Jericho. And it was also during this period that he starred on The Lieutenant, which was Gene Roddenberry's first TV show that he created and executive produced. And that was in episode 27 called Mother Enemy. It aired in April of 64. And interestingly, the show was about Koenig's character's mother, who was an American communist. Hence the title Mother Enemy. In 1967, he auditioned for the role of Chekhov. Now, later on, he had this quote about auditioning for the role. I was only one of 2 people who auditioned for the part, which was quite extraordinary. A couple hours after I auditioned, I heard that I had gotten the role, which he was really surprised about.
Did you hear how he found out he got the role?
No, tell that story.
So he's sitting there, he's waiting, and literally everybody's gone, and he's still waiting. Hey, because he told him to wait, and it's getting late, and in comes this gentleman. He goes, "Please follow me," and he follows him back to a room. He gets on his knees, pulls out a tape measure, and is measuring from, his crotch to his cuff, and he was fitting him for his costume.
And nobody had told him.
Nobody told him. He found out from the costume guy.
Kids, that is not a good example of Communications 101. That is not the way to communicate that. Oh, my God. Can you imagine? Why is this man on his knees in front of me?
Right. And he's putting his hand right up in your crotch.
Everything I've heard about L.A. is true. Oh, my gosh. Well, he found out later, after that experience, that he'd been hired primarily because of his resemblance to Davy Jones of the Monkees. Roddenberry was hoping to increase the show's appeal to young people. And he had this idea that, well, if I could get somebody who looks like Davy Jones, because I've heard he's very popular, then maybe I can pull some of those kids in.
Makes sense.
It makes sense. It kind of worked, too. He became pretty popular with young people. He got a lot of mail, and the bulk of that was from kids and teenagers. Another story that sort of went around about Koenig's hiring and the Chekhov character was put out by the studio's publicity department, and they were trying to say that the Soviet news organization Pravda had complained, saying, hey, look, Russians, we're the first people in space. We were the first people to orbit the Earth. And look at these terrible Americans. They don't even have a Russian character on their international spaceship. So the idea was that they were shaming Star Trek into creating a Russian character. That story isn't true. It kind of came out from the publicity department, and later on it was like debunked that no, that's not really what happened at all. And so if you've heard that story, it ain't true, guys. Let it go. You know, he was hired to play a young kid right out of the academy, but in reality, Koenig was 30 years old when he was hired, and his hair was beginning to thin and recede. So right away, the costume designers had to create sort of this Davy Jones-style mop top hairpiece for him. Yeah. And if you watch the first few episodes, you're going to see it. It doesn't quite fit him right. It looks kind of funky. And now, of course, you can look at it and go, oh, yeah, that definitely is a piece, isn't it? That's not so good. And apparently later on, he was able to let his hair grow out and then kind of scoop it around and comb it over, and it all worked. But right off the top, it was short, and so they had to kind of mop top him up. Roddenberry also wanted the Chekhov character to have humor and to pronounce things funny and, to sort of ham it up a little bit. So he asked Walter, really ham up the accent, really kind of go overboard a little bit so it'll be funny. Because of that, over the years, Chekhov's accent has been criticized by a lot of people. Now, when I came across this was kind of new to me. Being a fan of, since I was a little kid, I'd actually never heard of anybody saying, oh, that Chekhov accent is bullcrap. I've never really heard that. But
I haven't either.
There are people that say that it is inauthentic, particularly the way he pronounced W's instead of V's. Like if he were saying vodka, he would say vodka.
Vodka.
Right. Well, what Koenig was doing, though, was basing his accent on somebody who actually came from Russia, which was his father, who did not pronounce the V sound. He would pronounce vodka, vodka. So I don't know. Is it authentic or isn't it?
You would think it's authentic.
You would think it might be authentic if he's basing it actually on a person who came from that part of the world. Yeah. So there you go. When Walter first signed with Star Trek, he signed to be a recurring character, not a permanent member of the cast. And his first episode was Amok Time. His first line is bridge navigation, Chekhov here. It's the first time we see him on camera, and he appears on one of those little screens in Kirk's quarters, and it's his very first line, which when you think about it, what a perfect way to introduce him. He's on the bridge, Chekhov here, he says his name, and you're kind of like, who is this guy? But he's just introduced himself.
Yep.
And later on in that episode, if you remember what's going on in Amok Time, Spock has told Sulu and Chekhov to change course and take him to Vulcan, and Kirk finds out and says, go back to where we were going before. And then he and Spock talk, and then Kirk comes back up and he says, okay, let's go to Vulcan. And Sulu kind of recounts all this, and then this is when Chekhov has the line, I think I'm going to get space sick. So.
Nice try, by the way.
Thank you. It's the best I could do. I know. I'd be happy to hear you try it, pal. Go ahead, buddy. You want to take a stab at that? Yeah,
Just
I didn't think
on.
so. Just move on.
Get to my vodka.
Let's move on. Yeah, okay. So all in all, he had 4 lines in that first episode. But of course, he had a lot more lines later on and was featured in some episodes later on. His on-screen presence, as I mentioned before, had a nice big impact on fans. He got lots of mail, and it was because of the amount of mail that he received that Star Trek decided to sign him as a permanent cast member. So his popularity kind of cemented his place in history, if you will. When the early Season 2 episodes of Star Trek were shot, George Takei was out of the country. He was shooting the movie The Green Berets with John Wayne. Chekhov was often at the navigation and helm console by himself or with a guest actor, somebody we never met. So when Takei finally did return, the production staff, they told him, you have to share a dressing room with Koenig. And Takei hated this. He really hated it. And I guess there was an episode where they didn't mimeograph enough scripts, and it was, hey, can't you two guys share a script? Go ahead and just share that script. Just pour over it yourselves. Takei hated this. In fact, he was nearly going to quit. He was so upset that, why should I have to share my dressing room? And geez, I even have to share a script. And he was not happy.
Well, and imagine coming right off of Green Berets, which is a big movie,
right?
And he didn't have a bit part in it either.
No, he had a decent part.
Yeah. So
okay, so when that movie, as a kid, when that movie was on TV, right, and I saw the previews for it, and then I saw George Takei in the previews, and I'm like, crap, Sulu's in a movie. I gotta watch this.
Yeah,
absolutely, I watched it, and then I'm like, well, that wasn't very much a Sulu. It should have had more Sulu in it. John Wayne's going to give Sulu more time on the big screen. Come on, right. Bob. What were you thinking? So, Koenig and Takei, eventually they sort this all out, and they actually become very good friends. And Koenig was the best man in Takei's wedding in 2008. But personally, for me, I just wanted to say, that shot of Chekhov and Sulu, sitting at the console together, I think that has sort of become iconic. When you think about Star Trek, you think about certain things, the Enterprise or Kirk and Spock and McCoy, but I also think you tend to think about those two guys sitting at that console. And I do think a lot of people think about that when they see the show.
Well, absolutely. And then when there's a big decision to be made, one or the other or both have to turn around and look at the captain. And I did it sitting here at my desk. Don't know why.
Wait a minute. Hold on. All right. I just turned around to look at the captain. He's not there, though. I looked. He wasn't there.
No, he wasn't here either, but I just looked again. Still not there.
There's a point, maybe we should save this for the George Takei show, but what the hell? There's a point in one of the episodes, and I'm going to have to dive in to find it, when it doesn't work at all. Sulu turns around to look at Kirk. Since you brought it up. He turns around to look at Kirk, and as a viewer of the program, you're like, what the hell are you looking at, Sulu? Turn back around.
It deserves kind of a smack. Turn around. Keep driving the ship, man.
I forget what episode it is. I'm going to have to watch all 79 to find it. Oh, jeez. I can't believe I have to
for
watch.
The 300th time.
Go figure.
Go figure. All right. So I'll pick up here, after Star Trek is over. And I'm going to just go to an interview that Walter did with Shatner and Shatner's Raw Nerves back in March of 2011.
Wasn't that a good interview?
That was
very revealing.
Really good interview.
Yeah, it was.
And just Koenig just doesn't pull any punches either.
Well, no. I was very surprised. If you haven't seen it, it is out on YouTube, with William Shatner. It's his Raw Nerve series. Go look for it. It's very, very, very revealing. Sorry, Kelly. Go ahead.
Definitely. So during that interview, Walter's talking about how he's depressed after the original series ends. He doesn't know what to do, really, because he had a steady paycheck, steady job, going to work every day, and then suddenly he doesn't. And so, he takes up writing. And, his idea here is, hey, if I can get something on paper, even if it's a half a page, I feel like I've accomplished something.
I can relate to that, can't you?
Yeah, and so you'll see, I'm going to go through highlights of what he did in the 70s. And you'll see a couple places where, he's got writing credits. All right, so 1970, he did The Virginian. And these are mainly just one episode. Mm-hmm. Medical Center did an episode in 1970 as well, 71. And he was in a TV movie, and this was actually a pretty good movie. It actually was nominated for a Primetime Emmy for Outstanding Writing Achievement in a Drama.
Wow.
So now he didn't write it, but he was in it, and it had Mia Farrow, Hal Holbrook, Martin Sheen in the cast. So a decent role for him.
Yeah.
He in 71, he was also in Ironside. 73, he was in this little TV series. Didn't go very far. I think 16 episodes, or one season. I mean, called The Star Lost. And this series, it was created by Harlan Ellison. For those that don't remember, he did City on the Edge of Forever. So Walter played a reoccurring role, really only 2 episodes, of an alien. His name was Oro from the planet XR. And so it was kind of interesting. And just quick little tidbit on this show. It was a low budget Canadian TV show. Basically, it was based on a ship called the Ark. And as you can guess, the Ark was transporting, human civilization out into space because something happened to Earth and yada yada. But so Oro, his character, crashed into the Ark, and he was salvaging parts from the ship to get back to his planet in one of the episodes. So, all right. So just kind of interesting there. Now, we're in 1973. What happened else in 1973?
Well, that would be the animated series, Cal.
The animated series. And here's a quote from Walter Koenig. I was upset with the way I found out that I wasn't a part of the show and he found out at a convention.
Oh.
Everybody, harsh.
Oh, really?
He's always finding out.
Yeah, he is. He's always finding out in bad ways.
Yes. Everybody thought someone else had already told me. Dorothy thought Gene had. Gene thought Dorothy had. To save money, Filmation wanted Majel to do Uhura's voice and Jimmy Doohan, to do Sulu's voice. Since in cartoons, you get paid one paycheck, whether you do 2 voices or not. To Leonard's credit, he said he would not do the series unless they hired George and Nichelle, since they had been there from the beginning. So there you go. He was missing from the animated series, except he has a writing credit, and he did the episode The Infinite Vulcan.
Oh, that's right. He wrote that, didn't he?
Yes.
Right. Okay.
So there, he got his hands in it just a tad. And it was a good episode, too.
Yeah. That's the one with the giant copy of Spock, right?
Yes.
Giant
exactly.
Spock. Okay.
With weird plant-like people.
See, just not long ago, we were talking about remote control Spock. Then you had giant Spock.
Giant Spock. Right. He comes in all forms and fashion.
I do tend to pull us away, don't I? Sorry, go ahead.
1974, he did a few things. Nightmare Honeymoon. He did the Quester tapes. He was the administrative assistant as his credit there. This is TV movie, and we've talked about this before.
Yeah, it's Roddenberry produced. Yep.
Roddenberry and Gene Coon. So there, he keeps getting in the mix with Roddenberry. He also wrote an episode of Land of the Lost. So The Stranger is the episode he wrote.
No way. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Oh, good. That's awesome. Good for him.
Yeah. 1976. He was in an episode of Columbo, Fade into Murder, and William Shatner was in that episode as well.
Nice.
Now we're edging up to the fun stuff, right? Star Trek, God Thing. They're talking about the God Thing. And then phase 2. I'll read a quote from Walter. He says, I'm already gun shy because of the animated series, and I was more than a bit skeptical and concerned that I would not be involved with so many aborted starts from B-movie, God Thing, I think he's referring to a new series, which is phase 2. Then incredibly, the series thing happened. I went in for a costume fitting of the old costume and came home, and about an hour later, they said the whole project was put on hold.
Oh, jeez. Well, at least they bothered to call him. Can you imagine him showing up for the first day of work and nobody else is there?
Right, right.
Okay, so he gets home. He finds out that the series is canceled and not going forward. So what happens after that?
Well, that's a story for another episode.
Oh, gotcha. All right, that works for me. Well, next week, kids, the transporters aren't working, and we need to get down to the planet. So we're going to go inside the Galileo 7.
See you then.
Thanks for listening to 70s Trek, an independent fan production. Join us next week as we explore more about the production, the actors, the producers, and the influencers of Star Trek in the lost decade of the 1970s on 70s Trek.